How did you, Uno, reverse your family's rules? The curfew was 8 p.m., not 8:15, not 8:05, not 8:01, 8 o'clock exactly, or the basement door would already be open when I got home. My father standing beside it with his arms crossed and that expression on his face. The one that said he was disappointed but not surprised. The one that made it clear this was my fault for not planning better, for not leaving work early enough, for not anticipating traffic or weather or any of the 1,000 things that could make someone 3 minutes late. None of it mattered. Late was late, and late meant consequences. I spent my first night in the basement when I was 19. Came home at 8:07 after my shift at the coffee shop ran long because someone called in sick and my manager begged me to cover. Called my dad from work to explain. He said he understood. Said we'd talk when I got home. I actually believed him. Thought maybe this once he'd see reason. Recognized that I was being responsible by helping my employer. Being a good employee? The kind of daughter he'd raised to have a strong work ethic and sense of duty. I drove home feeling relieved that we'd avoided a conflict. Pulled into the driveway at 8:07. Dad was waiting on the porch. Pointed to the basement door without saying a word. The basement wasn't finished. Concrete floor cold enough to hurt. One bare bulb hanging from a wire that didn't reach the corners. No bathroom. No heat in winter. No fan in summer. Just a folding metal chair and a sleeping bag that smelled like mildew and something else I couldn't identify. Something that had been down there rotting for years. I'd sleep in that bag shivering or sweating depending on the season. Listening to my family move around upstairs. Hearing their voices muffled through the floorboards. The TV playing. Laughter during dinner. Normal life continuing while I sat in the dark counting hours until Dad decided I'd learned my lesson. The first night I cried. Begged him through the door to let me out. Promised I'd never be late again. Swore I'd quit my job if that's what it took. He didn't respond. Just walked away while I pounded on the wood until my hands hurt. Mom came down once with a bottle of water and a granola bar. Set them on the stairs. Told me this was for my own good. That I needed to learn that actions had consequences. That the real world wouldn't tolerate people who couldn't follow simple rules. She left before I could argue. Locked the door behind her. I spent 13 hours down there before Dad let me out the next afternoon. Missed a morning shift at work. Lost half a day's pay. All for being 7 minutes late through no fault of my own. My older brother Damien had no curfew. He was 24 and lived in the house completely free. No rent, no chores, no rules about when he came or went. He'd stumble in at 2 or 3 in the morning smelling like alcohol and cigarettes. Sleep until noon. Eat whatever food was in the fridge that I'd usually cooked or Mom had bought with the rent money I paid. Dad would see him and say nothing. Absolutely nothing. No lectures about responsibility, no discussions about contributing to the household. No consequences for being unemployed for the past 18 months while claiming he was finding his path and exploring opportunities. My younger sister Iris was 17 and treated like royalty. No curfew, no expectations, no responsibilities whatsoever. She spent her days painting in the converted garage studio that Dad had built for her. Spent her nights at friends' houses or parties or wherever she wanted without ever telling anyone where she was going. Mom would defend this by saying Iris needed creative freedom, needed space to develop her artistic voice without the constraints of arbitrary rules, needed support and understanding because she was sensitive and going through a difficult phase that had apparently lasted her entire life. Meanwhile, I paid $400 a month in rent while Iris got a weekly allowance of $75 for art supplies. The inequality was suffocating. I worked 45 hours a week at a coffee shop that paid $11 an hour, gave half my paycheck to Dad for rent and groceries, even though the groceries were mostly eaten by Damien and Iris. Came home exhausted and had to cook dinner for 6 people by 6:30 p.m. exactly, or face another lecture about pulling my weight. Had to clean the entire house every Saturday morning. Vacuum and dust and scrub bathrooms and mop floors while Damien slept and Iris painted and my parents sat on the porch drinking coffee and reading. If I complained, Mom would say I was being selfish, that I should be grateful they let me live here at all. That plenty of parents kicked their kids out at 18 and I was lucky mine were so generous. But the real poison wasn't the rules themselves. It was watching those same rules disappear for everyone else. Damien could leave dishes in the sink for 3 days and nobody said anything. Iris could skip her weekly chore of taking out the trash and Mom would make excuses about her needing to finish a painting. Dad would literally step over the vacuum cleaner I was pushing to tell me I'd missed a spot under the couch. The hypocrisy was so blatant, it felt like gaslighting. Like they were daring me to call it out just so they could tell me I was imagining things. That I was being paranoid and difficult and ungrateful for everything they'd done for me. I tried talking to them about it once. Sat everyone down and calmly explained how unfair the system was. Used specific examples, asked why I had different rules than my siblings. Dad said it was because I was the oldest and needed to set an example. I pointed out that Damien was older than me. Dad said Damien was going through a transitional period and needed support, not pressure. I asked when that transitional period would end. He didn't answer. Mom said I was being divisive, trying to turn the family against each other, making everything about me when it wasn't. That conversation ended with Dad sending me to the basement for being disrespectful. I spent that night writing a list of every rule and every exception, every punishment I'd received that my siblings hadn't, building evidence that I was too angry to use yet, too scared of making things worse. Everything changed on a Friday in November. I got stuck in traffic on the highway coming home from work. Not moving. Completely stopped. Watched the clock on my dashboard tick from 7:43 to 7:51 to 7:58. Called Dad at 7:55 to explain the situation. Told him I'd left work on time, but traffic was backed up from an accident. He could probably hear the frustration in my voice, the fear, the anticipation of what was coming. He listened silently while I explained. Then he said, "Rules are rules, Meredith, you know that," and hung up. I sat in my car watching the clock hit 8 o'clock while still 3 miles from home. Started crying. Not because I was going to the basement, because I finally understood that nothing I did would ever be good enough, that the system wasn't designed to be fair. It was designed to keep me controlled. I got home at 8:17, parked in the driveway and sat in my car for a minute trying to compose myself. Dad came out of the house, walked to my window, knocked on the glass. I rolled it down and he said, "Basement, now." I asked if we could talk about this. He said there was nothing to talk about. I was late. Late meant consequences. Those were the rules I'd agreed to by living under his roof. I said I hadn't agreed to anything. He said if I didn't like it, I could leave, find my own place, support myself completely, see how far I got without family help. The threat was clear. Submit or be cast out. Choose the basement or choose homelessness. No middle ground, no room for negotiation. I went to the basement, spent the night on the concrete floor wearing my work clothes that still smelled like coffee and vanilla syrup, shivering because November in the basement was cold enough to see my breath, listening to my family eat dinner upstairs, hearing them laugh at something on TV, the sound of the dishwasher starting, footsteps above my head as they got ready for bed, normal life continuing without me, like I didn't exist, like I didn't matter, like I was a problem that had been temporarily solved by being locked away. That night, something inside me changed. Not broke. Changed. Shifted. Crystallized into something harder and colder and more calculating than I'd ever allowed myself to be before. I started planning the next morning. Sat in the basement after Dad let me out at 11 a.m. and made lists in my phone. Every rule they'd ever enforced on me. Every exception they'd made for Damien and Iris. Every punishment, every double standard, every moment of blatant favoritism that I could document with dates and times. I'd been tracking it unconsciously for years. Now I made it conscious, made it organized, turned my resentment into data, my anger into evidence. If they wanted to play the rules game, I'd play it better. I'd use their own logic against them until the system collapsed under its own hypocrisy. I just needed the right opportunity, the right moment when they needed me enough that my absence would hurt. The opportunity came 3 weeks later. Dad announced we were having an important dinner party. His boss and his boss's wife were coming over along with 2 other couples from his office. This was a big deal because Dad had been trying to get promoted to regional manager for 8 months. He needed to make a good impression, needed to show he was stable and successful and had a functional home life, needed his boss to see him as someone who had it all together, someone who could be trusted with more responsibility. Dad was nervous in a way I'd never seen before. Actually asked me nicely instead of demanding. Said he needed my help making this dinner perfect. I spent 4 days planning the menu, researched recipes online, made shopping lists, bought expensive ingredients with my own money because Dad said he'd reimburse me later, which I knew meant never, but I bought them anyway. Pork tenderloin with herb crust, roasted vegetables with balsamic glaze, garlic mashed potatoes, homemade dinner rolls, a chocolate tart for dessert that required ingredients I'd never worked with before. I practiced the tart twice to make sure I could execute it perfectly. Spent my days off cooking test versions and making my family eat them so I could refine the recipes. Dad actually complimented me. Said he was impressed with my dedication. Said maybe we'd been too hard on me lately. That I was really stepping up and showing maturity. The manipulation in his words was obvious, but I pretended not to notice. Smiled and said I was happy to help. That family was important. That I wanted his promotion to happen because it would be good for everyone. He seemed genuinely pleased. Mom hugged me and said she knew I had it in me to be responsible and helpful. That this was the daughter she'd always known was in there somewhere. The daughter who put family first, who understood that sacrifice was part of love. I nodded and smiled and felt absolutely nothing except cold satisfaction that my plan was working. They thought I'd finally broken, finally submitted, finally accepted my role as the family servant. They had no idea what was actually coming. I spent the day of the dinner party cleaning the house until it sparkled, scrubbed bathrooms until the grout was white, polished the dining room table until I could see my reflection, vacuumed every room including the basement that nobody ever went into except me on punishment nights, set the table with our fancy dishes that we never used, the china with gold trim that had been my grandmother's, crystal wine glasses, cloth napkins folded into elaborate shapes I'd learned from YouTube videos. Everything had to be perfect. Had to look like a home where successful people lived, where functional families gathered, where nothing was wrong beneath the surface. The cooking started at 2 p.m. for a dinner scheduled at 6:30. I timed everything precisely. The pork needed to roast for exactly 90 minutes. The vegetables had to go in 45 minutes before serving. The potatoes would be mashed at the last moment so they stayed hot and fluffy. The rolls needed to come out of the oven right before everyone sat down so they'd be fresh and warm. The tart was already made and chilling in the fridge, looking absolutely perfect with its dark chocolate ganache and decorative shavings. Everything was choreographed like a dance. Every element timed to come together at exactly the right moment. I'd never worked so hard on anything in my life. The guests arrived at 6:15. I greeted them at the door, wearing the dress Mom had bought me specifically for this event. Something appropriate, conservative, the kind of thing a well-brought-up daughter would wear. I smiled and took coats. Made small talk about traffic and weather and how wonderful it was to finally meet everyone. Dad's boss was a tall man named Richard with gray hair and an expensive watch. His wife Gloria had that polished look of someone who'd never worried about money. The other couples were similarly affluent, successfully married people with successful careers and successful children. The kind of people my father wanted to become, the kind of people he thought he deserved to be. I served drinks in the living room, wine for the adults, sparkling water with lemon for those who didn't drink, passed around the appetizers I'd made earlier, bruschetta with fresh tomatoes and basil, stuffed mushrooms, bacon-wrapped dates. Everyone complimented the food, said I was clearly talented in the kitchen. Dad beamed and said I'd learned from my mother, who was an excellent cook. Didn't mention that Mom hadn't cooked a family meal in 2 years, that I'd been doing all the cooking while working full-time, that this talent he was so proud of had been developed out of necessity, not choice. But I smiled and accepted the compliments and played my role perfectly. Dinner was scheduled for 6:30. At 6:25, I excused myself to check on the food and make final preparations. Walked into the kitchen, looked at the beautiful roast in the oven, the vegetables ready to be tossed with balsamic, the potatoes boiled and waiting to be mashed. Everything perfect. Everything on schedule. Everything exactly as it should be. I turned off the oven, turned the burners up to high under the empty pots I'd placed there earlier, opened the oven door so heat would pour into the kitchen, set a timer on my phone for 20 minutes, and then I walked out the back door, got in my car, drove away. I didn't go far. Parked 3 blocks away on a side street where I had a clear view of the house. Sat in my car with the engine off, watching, waiting, feeling absolutely calm, no anxiety, no guilt, no second thoughts. Just cold certainty that what I was doing was necessary, that this was the only language my family understood. Consequences. They'd spent 2 years teaching me about consequences. Now they'd learn what consequences felt like when the roles were reversed, when the person they'd been controlling suddenly had all the power, when their success depended on someone who'd finally stopped caring about their approval. At 6:47, smoke started pouring from the kitchen windows, thick gray smoke that billowed out and up into the darkening sky. At 6:51, the smoke alarm started screaming. I could hear it even from 3 blocks away, high-pitched and insistent and impossible to ignore. At 6:53, the front door burst open and Dad's boss and his wife came rushing out. They weren't running exactly, but they were moving fast, looking back at the house with concern. Gloria was holding her purse against her chest. Richard was on his phone, probably calling 911. They got in their car and drove away without waiting for anyone else. The other 2 couples emerged next, confused, concerned, looking to my father for explanation he couldn't provide. Dad was running around the side of the house toward the kitchen, probably trying to figure out what had happened, how his perfect dinner had turned into a disaster. Mom came out next with Damien and Iris, all of them coughing, waving smoke away from their faces. The smoke alarm was still screaming. Dad reappeared from around the house carrying a fire extinguisher, went back inside. The alarm finally stopped about 2 minutes later. The guests were already gone. Just my family standing in the front yard looking at their smoke-filled house, looking for me. I wasn't there. I waited until exactly 8:03 p.m. to drive back. 3 minutes past my curfew. Perfect timing. Dad was standing in the driveway when I pulled up. His face was red, splotchy, veins visible in his neck and forehead. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. The kitchen behind him looked like a disaster zone through the windows. Smoke stains on the ceiling. The smell of burnt food and melted plastic carrying all the way to where I sat in my car. I took my time getting out, locked the door, put my keys in my purse, made him wait while I gathered my things. He was vibrating with rage, actually shaking. He started screaming before I'd taken 3 steps. Where had I been? What the hell was I thinking? Did I know what I'd done? His boss left disgusted. Gloria thought they were insane. The other couples were probably already telling everyone at the office about the disaster. His promotion was gone. Finished. Destroyed. All because I couldn't follow simple instructions. Couldn't do the one thing he'd asked. Couldn't be trusted with basic responsibility. The kitchen was ruined. The food was destroyed. Everything was my fault. Always my fault. I was a disappointment. A failure. A burden he should have cut loose years ago when he'd first realized I was more trouble than I was worth. I let him finish. Stood there with my arms crossed, waiting. He finally ran out of steam, breathing hard, face still red. He grabbed my arm, started pulling me toward the house, toward the basement door that was standing open, ready to swallow me for who knows how many days this time, for ruining his career prospects, for embarrassing him in front of his boss, for being the daughter who couldn't even cook a simple dinner without somehow sabotaging it. He was muttering the whole way, saying I'd done this on purpose, that I'd deliberately destroyed tonight because I was jealous or spiteful or fundamentally broken somehow. I stopped walking, made him drag me a few steps before he turned around. I smiled at him. Actually smiled. Wide and genuine and completely calm. He looked confused, unsure. That smile wasn't the reaction he'd expected. I said, "No, I don't think so." He said, "What?" I said I wouldn't be going to the basement tonight. Or any night. Not for this. Not for anything. He said I didn't have a choice. I was late. Late meant consequences. Those were the rules. I nodded. Said he was absolutely right. Those were the rules. And I was 3 minutes late. So according to his rule, I should go to the basement. But here's the thing. I learned about rules and consequences from him. He was an excellent teacher. Dad's face went from red to purple. He said this was completely different. That I'd deliberately sabotaged the dinner party. That I'd destroyed his promotion prospects. That I'd humiliated him in front of his boss and colleagues. I asked how it was different. I was late. Late means basement. Those are the rules he created. The rules he enforced consistently without exception for 2 years. The rules that didn't care about traffic or work running late or any reasonable excuse. Rules were rules. Consequences were consequences. I was just applying what he'd taught me. If the consequences seemed unfair or disproportionate or cruel, well, maybe he should have thought about that before making them. Mom came outside then, still smelling like smoke. Her hair disheveled, her face puffy from crying. She started yelling about the kitchen, about the burnt pots that were welded to the stove burners, about the smoke damage on the ceiling and walls, about the ruined food and the destroyed dinner party, about how embarrassed she was, how humiliated, how she'd never be able to show her face at Dad's office again. How could I do this to them? How could I be so selfish and vindictive? What had they done to deserve a daughter like me? She was crying now, real tears streaming down her face, the manipulation tactic she'd perfected over years of guilt tripping. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, started reading. Every rule they'd enforced on me over the past 2 years, with dates, with times, with specific incidents, the curfew violations, the basement punishments, the rent I paid while Damien paid nothing, the chores I did while Iris did nothing, the dinners I cooked, the cleaning, the endless stream of responsibilities and punishments and double standards. I'd documented everything. 2 years of evidence laid out in chronological order. Numbers don't lie. Statistics don't care about feelings. The data showed exactly what they'd been doing. The systematic mistreatment they'd normalized by calling it discipline and responsibility and life lessons. I showed them the spreadsheet I'd created, color-coded, with formulas calculating the financial inequality. I'd paid $4,800 in rent over 2 years. Damien had paid $0. I'd bought groceries worth approximately $3,000, most of which Damien and Iris ate. I'd cooked 740 dinners, cleaned the house 104 times, been to the basement 43 nights for a total of 687 hours, missed 17 days of work, lost approximately $1,200 in wages because I couldn't leave the basement when I had shifts. The numbers were devastating, undeniable. Mathematical proof of abuse dressed up as family values. Mom said I was twisting things, making it seem worse than it was, taking everything out of context. I asked what context made it okay to lock your adult daughter in a basement for being minutes late. What context justified charging her rent while her older brother lived free? What context explained why I had a curfew at 21 while my 17-year-old sister had none? She couldn't answer, just stood there opening and closing her mouth like a fish. Dad tried to take my phone. I pulled it back. Told him if he touched me or my property, I'd call the police. That everything I'd just shown them was documented, saved, backed up to cloud storage. Evidence of systematic abuse that I'd been too scared to report, but wasn't scared anymore. Damien came out to see what the screaming was about. He looked terrible. Hair messy from sleep even though it was only 8 at night, wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, the uniform of someone who'd given up on life but was comfortable doing it. I turned to him, asked him point blank why he didn't have a curfew, why he didn't pay rent, why he never cooked or cleaned or contributed anything to the household. He said that was different. He was going through a hard time. He needed support while he figured things out. I asked how long he'd been figuring things out. He said that wasn't fair. I said 18 months unemployed wasn't hard times. It was mooching. As I asked him what he was doing with his days. He said looking for work, networking, building skills. I asked what skills. He couldn't name any. I asked what networking looked like. He said I wouldn't understand. I asked him to explain it to me. He said I was being hostile. I said I was being curious. He said I was attacking him. I said I was asking questions. He went quiet, looked at Dad for backup. Dad was still processing what I'd shown them, still trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that had completely escaped his grasp. The daughter who'd been obedient through fear had suddenly revealed herself to be something else entirely. Someone calculating, someone strategic, someone who'd been documenting everything while planning revenge. Iris came out next, wrapped in an oversized cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked between everyone's faces trying to assess the situation, started defending Mom and Dad without knowing what she was defending, said I was being dramatic, that I always blew things out of proportion, that Mom and Dad were just trying to help me grow up and be responsible, that I should be grateful instead of angry. I asked her what she knew about responsibility, about paying rent or working 45 hours a week or cooking dinners or cleaning houses. She said that wasn't the point. I said that was exactly the point. She'd never experienced any of the rules I had, never been held to any standard, never faced any consequences. I asked her about her curfew. She said she didn't need one. I asked why. She said she was trustworthy. I asked if I wasn't. She said I'd proven tonight that I wasn't. I asked if she'd been to the basement even once in her life. She said no, but that was different. I asked how. She said she never gave them a reason. I pulled up my spreadsheet again, showed her the 43 times I'd been locked down there. 27 of those times I was between 0 and 10 minutes late. 11 times I was between 10 and 30 minutes late. 5 times I was more than 30 minutes late. Every single one had a documented reason. Traffic, work running over, car trouble, weather. Not one was because I was partying or being irresponsible. Just normal things that happened to everyone. But only I got punished. Iris went pale. I think reality was hitting her for the first time. She'd always known I was treated differently, but she'd never thought about what that meant. Never considered that the system benefiting her was destroying me. Never questioned why she got freedom while I got control. She said quietly that she didn't know it was that bad. I asked what she thought happened when I didn't come home for days. She said she figured I was staying with friends, being rebellious. She never imagined I was locked in the basement. Never occurred to her that our parents would do something like that. Mom had told her I was choosing to stay away to punish them. Choosing the basement over family time because I was too proud to apologize. The manipulation went deeper than I'd even realized. Mom had been lying to Iris about me for years, creating a narrative where I was the problem child, the difficult one, the one who made everything harder than it needed to be. Iris had believed it because why wouldn't she? Mom was her mother. Parents didn't lie about things like that. Parents didn't gaslight one child while favoring another, except ours did. And now Iris was standing there realizing she'd been complicit in my abuse, not because she was cruel, but because she'd been deceived into thinking it was normal, thinking I deserved it, thinking my punishment was my choice. Dad finally found his voice, said I was being manipulative, holding them hostage emotionally, twisting everything to make myself look like a victim when really I was just ungrateful. I'd had a roof over my head, food to eat, parents who cared about my future. So I had some rules. So what? Everyone had rules. That's what family was. That's what structure looked like. I was making them sound like monsters when they'd only ever tried to help me, tried to prepare me for the real world, which was much harsher than anything they'd ever done. If I couldn't handle a little discipline, then I'd never survive out there on my own. I laughed. Couldn't help it. The absurdity was too much. Called locking someone in a basement discipline. Called systematic financial exploitation and emotional abuse structure. Called cruel and unusual punishment preparation for the real world. I asked him if his boss locked him in basements when he was late to meetings. If his company charged him rent to work there. If real-world consequences included taking away someone's freedom and dignity for minor infractions. He said that was different. I said everything was different when it happened to him. When he was the one being hurt. But when he was the one doing the hurting, it was justified. Necessary. For my own good. I told them I was done. Finished. Completely through with their rules and their punishments and their systematic mistreatment. They could either treat me like an actual adult with basic human rights, or I'd leave tonight. Find roommates. Live in my car if necessary. Anything was better than staying in a house where I was less than human. Where I existed to serve and obey and accept whatever they decided I deserved. I'd tried playing by their rules. I'd tried being good. I'd tried earning their approval through submission. All it got me was more abuse. So now I was changing the rules. They could adapt or lose me completely. Their choice. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The smoke smell still hung in the air. The kitchen behind them ruined. The dinner party destroyed. Dad's promotion prospects gone. All because they'd pushed someone too far. All because they'd thought they could control me forever through fear and punishment. All because they'd underestimated what would happen when the person holding their family together decided to let go. They were processing this, realizing I meant it, realizing I wasn't making an empty threat, realizing they'd created this situation by being cruel and now had to live with the consequences. Dad tried to backtrack, said maybe everyone was tired and emotional, that we should sleep on it and discuss things calmly tomorrow, that we'd all said things we didn't mean and cooler heads should prevail. I said no, we'd discuss it now. New rules or I walked. He said I was being unreasonable. I said I'd been unreasonable for 2 years by accepting unreasonable treatment. Now I was being rational, logical, fair. Everything they'd claimed to value but never actually practiced. He said we couldn't make decisions like this in the heat of the moment. I said I'd been making this decision for weeks. This wasn't heat of the moment. This was calculated, planned, executed perfectly, just like they'd taught me. I laid out my terms. No more curfew. I was 21 years old, an adult. I'd come and go as I pleased. No more basement punishments. That ended immediately and permanently. The door would be locked and never used as a weapon again. Rent would be split 4 ways. Me, Damien, Iris, and them. Everyone contributed equally or everyone left equally. Housework would rotate weekly on a posted schedule. Everyone took turns cooking and cleaning and shopping and managing the household. No exceptions, no favorites, no excuses. Equal treatment across the board or I walked tonight and they'd never see me again. Damien objected first. Said he couldn't afford rent right now. I said he had 1 week to find a job and produce his first paycheck or he could find somewhere else to live. He said that wasn't enough time. I said 18 months was enough time. 1 week was generous. He looked at Dad. Dad said nothing. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that Dad didn't even try to help him. Damien was on his own, finally experiencing what it felt like when the person who'd been protecting him stopped, when the system that benefited him collapsed, when consequences applied to him too. Iris said this wasn't fair, that she was still in school, that she couldn't work full-time and pay rent. I said she was 17, old enough to work part-time, old enough to contribute something instead of nothing. She said her art was important, that she needed time to develop her talent. I said my job was important too. My time was valuable too. My future mattered too. But I'd been working and cooking and cleaning and paying rent while she painted and partied and did whatever she wanted without consequences. That ended now. She could get a part-time job and contribute $300 a month or she could live with Grandma. Her choice. Mom tried the tears again. Said I was tearing the family apart. Being cruel, heartless, vindictive. Everything she'd taught me not to be. I asked her if she thought locking me in a basement 43 times was kind. If charging me rent while letting Damien live free was generous. If making me do all the housework while everyone else relaxed was loving. She said I was twisting her words. I said I was repeating her actions. There was a difference. She said she'd only ever wanted what was best for me. I said what was best for her was having a live-in servant she could control through fear. She'd gotten that for 2 years. Now she was getting a daughter with boundaries who wouldn't accept mistreatment. Dad finally tried the nuclear option. Said if I didn't like living in his house, I could leave. That I had until midnight to pack my things and get out. That he wouldn't have someone so disrespectful and ungrateful under his roof. I said perfect. I'd be gone in 20 minutes. Started walking to my car to get boxes from the trunk I'd stored there a week ago. Prepared for exactly this scenario. Dad looked panicked. Asked where I thought I was going. I said anywhere but here. I had friends, had my car, had enough savings for a deposit on an apartment because I'd been secretly hiding money for the past 3 months. Depositing my checks at one bank but keeping cash at another, building an escape fund they didn't know about. Mom grabbed my arm, said we needed to talk about this, that we couldn't let it end this way, that family was forever and we'd regret burning bridges we couldn't rebuild. I pulled away, said they'd been burning bridges with me for 2 years. Every basement night was gasoline. Every unequal rule was a match. They'd built the fire. I was just refusing to burn in it anymore. She said I was being melodramatic. I said documentation wasn't drama, numbers weren't emotion, facts were facts, and the facts said they'd abused me systematically while pretending it was love. If that was their version of family, then I was better off alone. That broke something in Dad. He actually deflated. The anger drained out of him and left something smaller behind. He said fine. We'd try it my way, new rules, equal treatment, everyone contributed. He'd do it if that's what it took to keep me from leaving. I asked if he meant it, or if this was a manipulation to buy time. He said he meant it. Said he didn't want to lose me. That he'd been wrong. That maybe he'd gotten carried away with the discipline. That maybe he'd treated me unfairly. The closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. Not perfect, not even particularly good, but something. Mom nodded. Said she'd try harder. Would make sure the rules were fair. Would stop the basement punishments and the curfew. Would work with me to build something better. Iris said she'd get a job. Would help with chores. Would try to see things from my perspective. Damien said nothing. Just stood there looking lost. Finally said he'd start applying to jobs tomorrow. Would have something within the week. Would pay his share. Would prove he could be responsible. I didn't believe any of them, but I accepted their agreement. Told them I'd stay on a trial basis. 3 months. If the new system worked, I'd stay. If they reverted to old patterns, I'd leave without warning. They agreed. The negotiation lasted 2 more hours. We sat at the kitchen table that still smelled like smoke and hammered out details. Created a rotating chore schedule. Set rent amounts based on income. Established rules that applied equally to everyone. No curfews for anyone. No punishments that involved locking doors or restricting freedom. Everything would be discussed. Everything would be democratic. Everything would be documented so there could be no disputes later about who agreed to what. I created a shared document we could all access. A family constitution, essentially. Rules we'd all follow or all face consequences from. By midnight, we'd signed it. Literally signed it. I printed copies. Made everyone write their name and date it. Posted one on the fridge. Kept one in my room. Uploaded a PDF to cloud storage. This wasn't just an agreement. It was a contract. Evidence that they'd acknowledged the problems and committed to change. Protection against future gaslighting. Proof I could point to when they inevitably tried to tell me I'd imagined the old system. That things had never been that bad. That I was exaggerating. The signed document would remind them that they'd admitted to everything. The next morning felt strange. I woke up at 9 a.m. for the first time in 2 years. Came downstairs in my pajamas. The whole family was already up, looking at me nervously, waiting to see if I'd actually enforce the new rules, or if last night had been an empty threat I'd abandon once I'd calmed down. I made myself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, sat at the table, ate slowly. Nobody said anything. The silence was different than before. Not oppressive, just uncertain. Like everyone was learning a new dance and hadn't figured out the steps yet. Dad asked if I wanted coffee. Not demanded I make coffee for everyone. Actually offered to get me some. A small thing but significant. Proof he was trying. I said yes. Watched him pour it, add cream and sugar the way I liked, set it in front of me with something close to a smile. I thanked him. The interaction was stilted, awkward, but better than anything we'd had before. Mom asked what I wanted for dinner. Actually asked instead of assigning me to cook. I said I'd cook tonight, but someone else needed to do dishes. Iris volunteered. Another small victory. That week was adjustment. Damien actually got a job. Retail at an electronics store. Came home with paperwork showing his hourly rate and schedule. I verified it was real. Called the store to confirm. It was. He started the following Monday. Came home exhausted that first night. Complained about standing all day. About rude customers. About how hard working actually was. I didn't sympathize. Just said welcome to the last 2 years of my life. He went quiet. I think he was finally understanding what I'd been dealing with. What he'd been insulated from by my labor and his parents' favoritism. Iris got a job too. Coffee shop 3 blocks from our house. Part-time after school and weekends. Started bringing home $200 every 2 weeks. Not much, but something. She complained about the work, about the early mornings, about customers who were demanding. I reminded her I'd been working in a coffee shop for 2 years while also cooking and cleaning for the whole family. She said she didn't know it was that hard. I said that was because I'd never complained. Never made it anyone else's problem. Just did what needed to be done while everyone benefited from my labor without acknowledging it. Mom and Dad started doing their own chores. Dad handled trash and yard work. Mom did laundry and bathroom cleaning. I took kitchen and vacuuming. Iris did dishes and dusting. Damien did general tidying and grocery shopping. Everything rotated monthly so nobody got stuck with the worst jobs forever. The house was cleaner than it had been in years. Not because I was doing more, but because everyone was doing something. Shared responsibility meant shared investment. People who contributed to the cleaning didn't trash the house as casually. 3 months passed. The system held. Nobody reverted. Nobody tried to manipulate the rules. We had a couple of arguments about whether someone had done their chores properly, whether someone's rent payment was late, normal household disputes, but they were resolved through discussion, through referring to the document we'd created, through treating each other as equals who'd agreed to terms we were all responsible for upholding. It wasn't perfect, but it was sustainable. It was fair. It was something I could live with. I started saving money properly. Without rent taking half my paycheck, I could build real savings. Enough for a deposit on an apartment. Enough to buy a reliable car to replace my current one that was dying. Enough to have security. Options, freedom. I didn't tell my family. Didn't share my financial situation. They'd proven they couldn't be trusted with that information. They'd exploited it before. I wouldn't give them the opportunity again. My money was mine. My plans were mine. My future was mine to control. 6 months after the dinner party disaster, I moved out. Found an apartment with my best friend Kimiko, who'd been begging me to leave for years. Told my family at dinner. They looked sad, surprised. Mom asked if I was leaving because of them. I said yes and no. Yes, because they'd made living here unbearable for 2 years. No, because things had improved and I just needed my own space. Needed to prove I could make it on my own terms. Needed distance from people who'd hurt me even if they were trying to do better now. Some damage doesn't heal just because people apologize. Dad said he understood. Said he was proud of me. Said he knew he'd failed me in a lot of ways, but hoped I'd forgive him eventually. I said maybe. Time would tell. I wasn't ready to forgive yet. Wasn't ready to forget. But I was ready to move forward. To build a life that wasn't centered on surviving my family. To discover who I was when I wasn't in survival mode constantly. That had to be enough for now. Mom hugged me, cried, said she loved me. I said I loved her too, even though I wasn't sure I meant it. Some things you say because they're expected, not because they're true. Moving day was weird. My whole family helped carry boxes. Damien loaded furniture into the truck he'd bought with his job money. Iris had drawn a welcome home picture for my new place. Mom packed food for my kitchen. Dad wrote me a check for $1,000 and said it was to help with deposits and furniture. I almost didn't take it. Didn't want to owe them anything. But Kimiko said it was a gift, not a loan. That I should accept it and use it to build the life I wanted. So I did. Put it toward a new bed. A real desk. Things I'd never had because all my money went to rent and groceries. The apartment was small, but it was mine. Kimiko and I split rent equally. Split chores equally. Split everything down the middle because we were both adults who respected each other. The contrast to my family was stark. This was what healthy looked like. What equal looked like. What respect looked like. Nobody locked anyone in basements. Nobody had curfews. Nobody paid more than their share. Nobody worked harder than everyone else. We were partners in creating a home, not enemies in a power struggle. The difference was staggering. I still see my family for holidays. Keep my distance the rest of the year. We're cordial, functional, but not close. The relationship is built on mutual understanding that I won't tolerate mistreatment and they can't survive without my cooperation. They know I documented everything. Know I could share those documents with extended family, with friends, with anyone who asked about our relationship. They know their reputation depends on me staying quiet about what they did. That's its own kind of power. Its own kind of justice. Not perfect, but something. Damien apologized about a year after I moved out. Actually apologized. Said he'd been a coward for not standing up for me. That he'd known what was happening was wrong but was too scared of becoming the target himself. Said watching Dad turn on him during those 3 months of new rules made him understand what I'd experienced for 2 years, what it felt like to suddenly have expectations, to face consequences, to be held to standards. He said he was sorry. I said apology accepted, but trust was different than forgiveness. He'd have to earn trust through time and consistent behavior. He understood. Iris apologized too. Said she'd been naive and sheltered. That she'd believed Mom's lies about me because she had no reason not to. That realizing the truth broke something in her understanding of family, of love, of what parents were supposed to be. She said she was in therapy now, working through the guilt of being complicit, working through the realization that she'd been used as a weapon against me without knowing it. Her favorite child status had been a manipulation too, a way to isolate me, to make me the problem. She said she was sorry for benefiting from my suffering. I said she couldn't help being born into this family, but she could help how she responded to learning the truth. So far she was doing okay. Mom and Dad never really apologized, not properly. They acknowledged things had been difficult, that maybe they'd been too strict, that perhaps the basement had been excessive, but they never took full responsibility, never admitted to abuse, never called it what it was. They reframed it as misunderstanding, as learning experience, as something we'd all grown from. The gaslighting continued just in subtler forms. I didn't push, didn't need their admission. I had documentation, had evidence, had the truth recorded in spreadsheets and notes and signed documents. Their denial didn't change reality. The basement door is still locked. Nobody's been down there since that November night 3 years ago. Dad says it's storage now. Mom says it's too cold and damp to use properly. But I think they locked it because it reminded them of who they'd been, what they'd done. The door is evidence they can't destroy, can't explain away, can't pretend wasn't real. So they locked it and pretended it didn't exist. Just like they'd locked me down there and pretended I didn't exist. The irony is almost beautiful. Dad's promotion never came through. His boss apparently told HR about the disastrous dinner party, about the smoke-filled house and the missing daughter, about the dysfunction that suggested instability. Companies don't promote people who can't manage their home lives. Dad blamed me for a while, then stopped when I reminded him I'd been willing to make that dinner perfect. He was the one who created conditions that made me leave. Actions have consequences. He taught me that. I just applied the lesson better than he expected. Now he lives with the result. 3 years later, and I'm doing better than I ever thought possible. Working full-time at a design firm, paying my own rent, building my own life, dating someone who treats me with respect, going to therapy to unpack the damage, learning who I am when I'm not surviving. It's hard. Recovery is hard, but it's mine. My progress, my choices, my future. Nobody can lock me in a basement. Nobody can tell me when to be home. Nobody can exploit my labor or my money or my time. I'm free. Actually free. And that freedom tastes better than any apology my family could offer. Sometimes people ask how I escaped, how I went from controlled to free. I tell them about the dinner party, about walking out, about using my family's rules against them until the system collapsed, about documentation and evidence and strategic revenge. They look shocked, say it sounds extreme, say maybe I went too far. I ask them how many nights they've spent locked in a basement, how much money they've been forced to pay while others lived free, how many times they've been punished for things beyond their control. They go quiet, because they don't know. They can't know. They've never lived it. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.